I am Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary here in New York. Thank you for joining us in our series of Just Conversations, where we engage issues of racialized inequities intrinsic to our nation and our collective responsibility to create a more just future. Today's Just Conversation is the first in a series of conversations with a member of a cohort of 12 scholars, faith leaders, artists, and activists who have come together in a project sponsored by the Henry Luce Foundation to reflect on religion and racial justice, expanding the moral imaginary through film, and to share their research and work. It is a distinct pleasure to welcome to this conversation today my colleague and friend, Dr. Amey Victoria Adkins-Jones. Dr. Adkins-Jones is a theologian and Black studies scholar with expertise in Mariology, theological anthropology, and womanist and Black feminist thought. Her research specifically considers Black Madonnas in iconography, human trafficking, the prison industrial complex, racial justice, visual culture, and artificial intelligence. She is a practicing birth worker, a trained iconographer, and has a career background in UX copywriting and design. Outside of academia, Dr. Adkins-Jones is a Baptist minister who frequently preaches and teaches around the country. A displaced Southerner, as she describes herself, she joyfully builds community and hospitality between Boston, Massachusetts, and Newark, New Jersey. I welcome you to this conversation today. Thank you for joining me, and I know we'll have much to talk about.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored and excited, as always, to see you and to chat. Hello out there, all of the invisible people.
Indeed, indeed. So let's jump right in.
All right.
And begin with your work on Mariology, particularly the Black Madonna. When we speak of the Black Madonna, there is a distinction between iconography, in which the Virgin Mary is depicted as Black, though I always say historically such depictions are closer to her appearance as a fair complexioned, blue-eyed Madonna. But there's a distinction between those depictions and the Black Madonnas, a great majority of which, to my knowledge, are found in European countries. Black Madonnas go back to at least the medieval period. So my question is this, Amey Victoria, where did these Black Madonnas come from, especially given the whitewashing of Christian images and iconography that has happened across history?
All right, yeah, jumping right in. So first, I always think that it's important to say that we have many, many rich traditions in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, in the Coptic Orthodox Church, of Marian images, of images of Christ as well, but images of Mary with dark skin, with Black skin. And so all the idea of a sort of post-colonial moment of enculturated images is not really necessarily telling the story around images and people and histories throughout all of Christianity. But that being said, some of the most popular and the most contentious Black Madonna figures, and those include images, statues, shrines, are present throughout Europe. There are over 300 formal Black Madonnas. That number sometimes goes closer to 400, as particularly named and venerated by the Roman Catholic Church. Right. And so I get this question a lot, one, because I'm not Catholic, but two, because in terms of Black theology, which is largely known as coming out of Protestant Black church folks in the United States, Black liberation theology, and the long history of that, in relationship to union. And even as Black Catholics have also, espoused theology, Mary has not been a primary figure of reflection in Protestantism. I always joke that Catholics like really literally enshrined Mary, and Protestants were like, we'll just take your baby. Thank you so much for your service.
Right.
And so it seems a little bit odd that I have come to her. But I find that she, as the one who has given Christ his flesh, is a principal point of reflection in terms of theological anthropology. And what is interesting to me about Black Madonnas is that, one, shrines of the Madonna have been, and devotion to Madonnas have been what have created the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church around Mary. They have been sort of impressed upon by the devotion of the masses to have to respond in terms of ecclesial statements and authority in many ways. And so it's always interesting how movements of people push policy, if you will, but also the notion that there are these figures with Black skin that are sacred already present in the Christian tradition through moments of racial encounter and through our very trying, tragic, and horrific histories of Christian colonial enterprise. So the fact that we have these moments or these figures of reflection that have been written off in the middle of the Enlightenment, like, oh, well, these aren't holy images anymore. This is smoke damage. Or these aren't, sacred mysteries of Blackness. These are, pigments changing because of chemical environments.
Right.
That sort of writing away to me is not only widely questionable, but is reflective of a kind of proto-anti-Blackness as it emerged in Christian colonial execution. And so wanting to return to that as a theological source of construction and reflection means something in a world that is very anti-Black, but also in a world that's continuing to deal with sexism, misogynoir, issues around equity across multiple identities. And so for me, it's a really powerful site of theological reflection. That was a lot.
Thank you. No, but very good. You've said a lot, yes, and it leads me to a couple of questions, and I want to get in a minute to this significance. But you also mentioned, as people contemplate this Black Madonna that goes far back in history, that they have often suggested, as you said, that, well, this is because of some chemical reaction that has occurred with the painting itself or the image itself. And so, and it's funny that it would occur with a Black Madonna and it didn't occur with all these images of white Jesuses. But and so they've suggested that rather than really respecting the way in which that has long been a part of Christian history, Western religious history, as well as suggesting that these images come from non-Christian religious sources, and so goddess religions, etc., that which they may call pagan religions, and then thus associate the Black Madonna with fertility cults and with breeding and the earth, etc. And as this happens, Dr. Adkins-Jones, does this not perpetuate a trope or a stereotype in relationship to Black women as the laborers, the breeders, as the foils to the pure white woman who doesn't engage in this kind of earthy work?
Right. I think it absolutely does, but I don't think that those are the only stories. Mm-hmm. And I will share two examples from my forthcoming book, even though I don't know when it is for me. But the book title right now is Immaculate Misconceptions. And so one of the things that I've argued before, and there's some article forms of this, but one of the things that I've argued before is that one of the images that does not necessarily travel to the United States in its sort of colonization period, right? Like why does the Black Madonna not travel as a sacred image? I have an argument about the rise of the mammy figure as asexual, as surrogate, as sort of all virtuous and performative and docile as a body, sort of replacing that figure. And if we look at several films, Gone with the Wind and others, then we can actually see some of these figures and actresses and in their sort of mammy role. They often will have a halo, right, around them. They will often have these sort of praying hands and looking up to heaven sort of moments, as proper subjects, as proper maidservants or bond slaves, as sometimes that Marian Magnificat is translated. But to those other extents, I think that one of the other things that I sort of speak about, and particularly around surrogacy, is that so many of these Black Madonnas, while they are representative of maternal figures, as the Virgin Mary and divine motherhood is always articulated, what is perhaps more significant, or at least has to also be considered, is that many of these most popular shrines are sites of healing. They're sites where no one else could turn or no one else could go. And so what might healing or the capacity for communal reconciliation or joy, how is that tied to an ethos of Black life? And even as we are sort of stalked in our world by Black death. And so wanting to think about what is constructive, specifically for Black women's bodies, what does a consideration of the Black Madonna have to say about consent, have to say about maternal mortality, have to say about pain, have to say about suffering? I think a lot and have spoken a lot about what does it mean to just want to mother and not want to mother a movement? What does it mean to have one's son executed unjustly by the state and you be made to watch and mourn on? What are these traditions, and what are they calling us to be accountable for in our world? And how are they causing us or asking us to think differently about how different kinds of bodies carry the divine within them, and also how we read that divine economy against the sort of modes of consumption that seem to be all encompassing, particularly for many Black women, Black mothers, Black birthing people, Black trans women, people who have Black mothers across the board. And so wanting to think deeply about that.
Oh my goodness, you have said a lot. I love the way in which you lift up this reality of a Black mother, Black woman bringing forth life juxtaposed to death, right? And the reality of death, the reality of healing in contrast to the reality of pain and suffering. And in all that you said, you're speaking of agency here, right? And so that in this regard, it's not simply a Black body being put upon, but having agency, and even agency over the life that the Black Madonna has in her hands. So it is allowing us, it seems to me, just as you have said, to look into and peer into the reality of Black women's complex story differently, overriding. So the Black Madonna overrides the image of Black Mammy and all of these other images that have overridden the significance of the Black Madonna. And so it leads me to ask what you have in so many ways just answered, but to ask in a different way. So what you were saying to us is that this image of the Black Madonna has significance far beyond religion, right? And faith, in that it's a sacred image that makes a history and a reality in bodies even more sacred. So it seems that the Black Madonna is an image that we would want to particularly and intentionally begin to bring forward in such a time as we find ourselves. Your thoughts on that?
I would argue as much and as so. And I think that one of the beautiful things about thinking about this kind of imagery is not only that often it is incredibly beautiful, right? Like there's so many images of formal Black Madonnas, but also so many other images of Black Madonnas that have been very powerful in terms of capturing our imaginations of the sacred, in terms of capturing our imaginations of what is holy, and really witnessing against the kinds of purity narratives,
Yes.
the kind of purity ideas, or I sometimes talk about purity, the purity ideals that would delimit certain kinds of bodies in so many ways. But also, I mean, much of this started for me with the question of trafficking and how certain kinds of bodies become available for consumption in the first place. Why are we able to dispose of, to consume, to discard certain kinds of bodies? And I say bodies with the, Robert and Gigi Kelly, we aren't talking about bodies, we aren't talking about lives. And it's like, yes, but whiteness has been talking about bodies. So
that's right.
To say that as I'm moving us toward thinking about lives, and wanting to say, well, how did we get here? And I think that recognizing the presence of the Black Madonna, I think that imagery, I think that considering, who is iconic, and not in terms of celebrity, but in terms of how we see sacrality, how we see ritual, how we see holiness in one another, and what that holds us accountable for is deeply beholden to the images that we see. It's deeply beholden to the way that images teach us and form us. And I'm interested in that formation, and particularly because I'm also deeply interested not only in, I frequently say when I'm lecturing, holding Christianity accountable for its dreams as much as its nightmares.
Yes.
But I'm also interested in having different kinds of conversations that expand our imaginations outside of Christianity. So a lot of times, for instance, I will get, this just happens to be a teaching tool here. I get a lot of comments on this Black Madonna, but this is a Zili Danto, who is Loa in Haitian Vodou. And so wanting to think about other ways of engaging these different kinds of images and these questions or ideas around Black, holy, sacred figures. And for me, it's kind of obvious. This is Mary's mama.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about a Black Christ or anything else. Well, that means we got to talk about Black mamaing as well. And so for me, it's been a really powerful and very easy turn in conversation with literature, in conversation with Black feminist thought, and conversation with art history and art and conversation with a multitude of Africana religious traditions as well.
Can't wait to read your book, and there's no better time to begin to discuss the way in which Black bodies are depicted. And you're so right that whiteness has talked about and commodified and used and exploited the Black body, and has not held sacred Black lives. And this is why we talk about the Black body, which leads me to transition so we can get to this for our time, leads the way the Black body is acted upon, if you will, in film. And of course, you've done a lot of work in this regard as well, in terms of technology and the way it's changed the way in which we view violence against Black bodies. For instance, the viral videos of violent encounters between police and Black people. Now, I think on the one hand, without these videos, this reality of Black life would continue. to go unnoticed. The George Floyd lynching or the Elijah McCain murder would have never come to light. On the other hand, they run the risk of making us further immune to this anti-Black violence, regarding it as business as usual, while also inducing racialized trauma. So what are we to do? Can you speak to this? And let me sort of combine it with another question, since given our time, but related. This has come to light even more, not simply in regard to these sort of viral videos, but also as more and more movies depicting Black life and Black history emerge. And so there's controversy that has emerged around the Till film and Emmett Till's lynching, right? And while the Till film doesn't show the actual lynching of Emmett, it does show, apparently, I haven't seen it yet, the open casket, which was a catalytic moment in African-American history and in our nation's struggle for racial justice, as was the George Floyd film. So it's a catch-22 here. What are we to do in relationship to depicting the realities of Black life, Black history, and the violence without triggering racial trauma and all of the other implications of that?
I don't know what we are to do, but there are a couple of things that I have certainly been thinking about. I will share a story. You know, I'm from the South, and I'm from a very rural place. Mm-hmm. So I certainly, I preface this with we need far more gun control than we have, and no one needs a semi-automatic rifle. That being said, I grew up around people who hunted. My family hunted, and so I grew up around guns. And I remember going. My sister moved to Arizona. Arizona is a very different state, and so I remember she was a member of a gun range, and we went to a shooting range. And I remember for the first time in my life seeing these like massive artillery weaponry that people were shooting. And I was just completely shocked, because those are not the guns that I was ever around. And I remember looking at the targets that were available. And obviously there were no Black bodies, but it was interesting that there were zombies everywhere. And the point of this is that I have some different kinds of questions around how media forms our images of the other and the other who is a threat. I teach a class called The Walking Dead, and this is sort of feeds into this sort of project I'm thinking about in terms of how we see or how we witness evil, how we see or witness dangers or threat. And so when I hear some of these testimonies from police officers who have committed murder, what the way that they felt, or the way that they said that, you know, they were threatened frequently by children. When I think of Darren Wilson's testimony, it's people are describing Black children, Black humans as monsters,
as beasts, right?
As these sort of, you know, like we're in a video game, and it was me versus them. It was survive, even if someone is running away the opposite direction,
right? And
so I have questions around what forms our notion of this sort of ethical or justified violence, right? I talk about, like, in a zombie apocalypse, like, what's murder anymore, right? Like, it's survival. So how these ideas inflect us, or are a part of our theological notions of human being. But when I also think about sort of the live film captures, I am overwhelmed by the need for Black people in particular, but also not just Black people, anyone in a mass shooting, right? That even with all of the need to bear witness, that seeing is not believing. Seeing these images and seeing death continues to traumatize and re-traumatize the people the communities who've already experienced the loss and the threat, and doesn't seem to be making an argument or being convincing enough for change for those who have the power to do something about it. And I think about Mamie Till saying, like, we will open this casket.
Right.
And the significance of those images as they were published, they were in Jet, as they were circulated, to tell a story and to bear witness, but to also still have a question that begging recognition from the state is not something that is productive or has not yet seen a deep sense of productive response or a long-standing sense and catalyst for change in our society. So I started with zombies because I think that there's certainly lots and lots of psychological evidence of us seeing real life images and becoming completely desensitized to them. Images of war, images of mass trauma, images of blood and bodies broken and death. We are inundated with them. But also then to think the other sort of piece of that as the way that fantasy can create, images of possibility, but can also reiterate dystopias that distance us from other people in these different kinds of ways. And so we won't go into Fortnite. I will signal to our audience that Dean Douglas and I have had an extensive set of conversations around Fortnite and children, and don't know where we land on that. But one of the things that's been very powerful so far, even now in our conversations with this cohort, is that many of us find films to be much more helpful pedagogically than sometimes the text form, literary form. So much of our reading is very brief. Attention spans are different now. And so what sort of holds and captures the minds and thus the hearts, the affect of a watcher is different than perhaps what it has been in other moments in time. But also some deep hesitations and questions about, well, how do we do this in a way that honors life? How do we do this in a way that does not become, what's the line for tragedy porn, so to speak, and not. And so thinking through this with a group of people is something that, in terms of the ethics and theology and sort of some of our different religious perspectives coming to these scenes is really interesting. That being said, I haven't seen Till yet, and it is in part because I really struggle to watch images, even in part. I find for myself that I had to do a lot of work to prepare myself to watch movies in a way that I didn't have to at one point in time. And I think for me, as I've sort of processed, well, what is this? I used to be able to watch, it's Halloween time. I used to be able to watch horror movies. I used to love it. I used to love all the and I don't anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that what has happened is I've seen it in real time. And so for me, I can't watch fictive depictions in quite the same way, or recreations of narratives in quite the same way, because it's really difficult for me to detach those from reality and space. And maybe that's part of the point. I will watch Till at some point, but it takes a tremendous amount of effort for me personally. And it's also just something that's on my mind. Is there a way for us, and this is my sort of theological question, can we honor and respect and name suffering without also needing it to still be redemptive? And I'm not sure what that looks like or what that means yet, but that's something I'm certainly committed to thinking about.
Well, and that's a good place for us to end with that question. And first I will say, Amey Victoria, that I too find it very difficult to watch film these days and have not yet seen Till. And it's my own sorting through, I think, racial trauma and just seeing too much of it. But a good place to end as we think about the power of film, the power of imagery, and that is there a way to depict, and I will paraphrase you, the realities of Black life and Black suffering and its complexity without it having to be redemptive? Thank you for this conversation. I hope that you all get a taste of the kind of conversations we are having in this cohort of scholars of color that have come together to work through these issues and to think about them in ways to expand our moral imaginaries of what is possible. And I look forward to sharing more of those conversations with you through our Just Conversations. I also invite you all back for my next Just Conversation this Friday, October 28th at 2:15 p.m., where I will speak about the upcoming election with Reverend William Barber from the Poor People's Campaign. Learn more and RSVP on the EDS at Union website. So this Friday on the 28th, as we talk about this important midterm election that is coming up. Thank you for joining us today, and a special thanks to Dr. Amey Victoria Adkins-Jones.